No, I didn't embezzle the company's money, I said, picking up the phone call from my father. The first thing I heard was his booming voice, making my ears ache. How on earth am I supposed to embezzle the company's money when I've retired? You're way off base, I calmly replied to my father, sensing his tone cooling somewhat. But I do know who the embezzler is, he shouted again, his flustered voice audible over the phone. Who is it? Name the criminal, my father demanded, his voice getting louder. The one who's been using the money is. I paused, mentioning the name. My father seemed caught off guard, completely speechless. My name is Henry Hawkins. I have been working in the accounting department of my father's company for 8 years now, I explained. I have a brother, Bob, who's often called Mr. Perfect due to his talent and looks. I've always been compared to Bob and lived in his shadow since childhood, I continued, reflecting on my life. Despite my efforts, my parents always favored Bob for his exceptional talent. Even when I earned achievements, they seemed overshadowed by Bob's presence. Growing up, I yearned for my parents' love, but it always seemed to elude me, I added, recounting the struggles. Eventually, I accepted that I would never match up to Bob's achievements. So, I tried to find solace in living a relatively free life away from their high expectations. However, my path was already decided. I had to join the family business. I sighed, explaining my predicament, not because of my abilities, but simply because I was a family member. Even if I was considered less competent than Bob, supporting the family business was mandatory. Initially, working in the accounting department was peaceful, I recalled, but when Bob took over as president, everything changed. It's a nuisance if you interfere in my management, he would say. I never intended to meddle. I only wanted what was best for the company. As I tried to speak up, I continued, frustration evident. Bob smirked and dismissed me, labeling me as incompetent. Incompetence gets in the way, Henry. So please leave. The phone call with my father left me conflicted. Between family expectations and my own aspirations, the tensions only seemed to grow. I was on the verge of saying a lot of things, but when I heard those words, my will to argue vanished completely. Reluctantly, I agreed to leave the company. Oh, I'm relieved you understand your own incompetence, Henry, Bob taunted as I packed my belongings. Being a CEO seems quite leisurely, doesn't it? You're the one who said I should leave, so once I do, never get involved with me again. Ha, of course I'm the one saying no to you. Don't come crying to me when you're in a financial pinch, Henry, Bob replied with a smirk. Leaving the company felt forced, but I wasn't attached to it. Instead, a strange relief washed over me knowing I could finally move on. Finding a new job took longer than expected. I suspected Bob had been pressuring related companies. Despite the difficulty and time it took, I eventually found a job that brought me satisfaction. It's not a big company, but the people here are warm and kind, I reflected. No one sees me as an inferior elder brother, as they did in my previous job. Have you gotten used to the work? A woman peered into my face as I focused on the computer, showing a kindly smile. She was Sonia Smith, the CEO's daughter of this company. Despite the stereotype of the CEO's daughter being arrogant and pampered, Sonia was nothing like that. Though clearly doted on by her father, she was considerate and caring, even showing concern for me, a newcomer. Yes, thanks to you, I replied with a smile, watching Sonia return to her seat. Thanks to Sonia's care, I began to feel more settled in my new role. I quickly bonded with my new colleagues, and within a few months of switching jobs, my relationship with Sonia had also grown deeper. We often have dinner at a nearby restaurant if we finish work at the same time, I noted, contrasting these interactions with the impersonal atmosphere at my father's company. It was a refreshing change. One day, enjoying my current work-life balance, my smartphone rang unexpectedly. I had finished work early and was thinking of relaxing at home when I saw a familiar name on the display, Bob. I hesitated, tempted not to answer, but knowing he'd persist, I reluctantly picked up. Hello, brother. You're slow to answer, aren't you? Managing well with that new job? Bob's voice was casual, as if lounging around even through the phone. What do you want? I cut to the chase, eager to end the call. Why would I call you someone I've supposedly cut ties with? Bob continued, his tone falsely calm, but I could sense his smugness. There's a woman named Sonia Smith at your company, isn't there? He asked abruptly. I met her at a party recently. She struck me as a good and modest lady, thought I might get closer to her. I felt momentarily speechless. Bob's intentions were clear, though his voice feigned calmness, masking his underlying smirk disgustingly. I couldn't see his expression over the phone, but I could easily imagine it. "Don't tell me you're asking me to mediate between you two," I asked incredulously. "You're surprisingly perceptive, brother. That's helpful," Bob replied smoothly. I felt an impulsive urge to hang up right then, but somehow I held back, took a deep breath, and calmly opened my mouth. "Didn't you have a girlfriend who was the daughter of another company's president?" I probed. "I remember when I was working elsewhere, around the time you were becoming president, you were engaged to the daughter of a collaborating company." Though I hadn't spoken to her, I'd heard she suited Bob's personality well. As much as Bob was adored, I couldn't believe his father would approve of him having two girlfriends simultaneously. I continued, raising my concern. Bob's response was weary. "Oh, that woman. Her company's in financial trouble. I broke up with her to avoid any trouble for myself." It was a typical story for Bob. Despite being engaged, he cleanly severed ties due to her financial difficulties. Some might see it as a pragmatic approach to a political marriage, but it was something I couldn't support. "Even though we're in the same company, she's the president's daughter. She's not just anyone," I emphasized firmly. Casually chatting with Bob was easy, but mediating between him and Sonia was out of the question. Despite seeing each other daily and dining together several times a week, I foresaw trouble if I admitted this to Bob, so I politely declined, making up excuses. "Well, that makes sense. It's impossible for a regular employee like you, bro." Bob surprisingly accepted my refusal. The call ended somewhat smoothly that day, but soon after, I began receiving frequent calls from him. Each time he called, Bob insisted, "You're at the same company. You should find some common ground if you try." Finding it ridiculous, I denied his request and hung up, growing increasingly annoyed with each repetitive call. Then calls from my father started coming, not about work, but about Bob. I thought I wasn't involved anymore. I muttered as my father explained, "Bob mentioned you know Miss Smith well. We need your help to deepen her relationship with Bob." As a child, I'd yearned for such validation from my parents, but now it only irked me. "I can't do that," I responded tersely, feeling only annoyance listening to my father's reasoning. I ended the call abruptly without saying more. One day, amidst the persistent calls from Bob and my parents, Sonia invited me to dinner after work. To be honest, I was grateful for Sonia's invitation, as it provided a welcome respite from the persistent calls from my parents. We decided to dine at our usual nearby restaurant. Once the food arrived, Sonia looked troubled as she began to speak. "Have you been in touch with your brother lately?" she asked, her concern evident. I had previously shared with Sonia about my family dynamics and why I had changed jobs. Despite knowing I wasn't on good terms with Bob, her sudden question left me uneasy. "Did my brother do something?" I inquired cautiously. "Well, yeah," Sonia admitted. "I guess there was an incident. Bob mentioned they met at a party." I felt a twinge of discomfort hearing this, but the immediate issue was Bob's persistent calls and the possibility he might be disrespecting Sonia. As I voiced my concern, Sonia peered intently at me. "Oh, what?" I asked, thrown off guard. "You don't look much like brothers, do you?" Sonia observed, her words stirring childhood memories. "The younger one is outstanding, but the older brother is not so much," she continued, reflecting on the differences between us. "They don't look like brothers at all." These words echoed sentiments I had heard repeatedly from various people, a reflection of the stark contrast between Bob's success and my more modest achievements. Unpleasant memories flashed through my mind, memories of similar comments from my parents and others. But I brushed them aside, focusing on Sonia's advice. "If you're open to advice," she suggested gently, "you should consider distancing yourself from Bob." I knew it wasn't my place to interfere, but I felt compelled to speak up. Since changing jobs, Sonia had been kind to me, and I didn't want her to be unhappy. That's why I spoke, but to my surprise, Sonia responded, "I feel the same way." She smiled warmly and took a sip of water. "I'm not particularly interested in getting close, but my father is concerned." "Hey, do you know a secret?" she whispered conspiratorially. I was taken aback, but I replied cautiously, "Is it related to what I know?" "Who knows? It might be a different story," she replied with a smug smile. Several weeks after our dinner together, my phone rang. It was my father. Our contacts had been sparse lately, so I assumed he was too busy to deal with me. "Hello, Dad," I can't mediate. I started, but before I could continue, he cut in sharply. That's not why I called today. Have you embezzled money from our company? His sudden accusation caught me off guard, and his yelling stunned my ears. I briefly considered shouting back, but I understood the gravity of the situation. How could I, having resigned, embezzle company money? That's a ridiculous accusation, I retorted, trying to keep my composure. Well, but my father's voice faltered, then calmed somewhat. I sighed heavily, steeling myself for what I had to say. But I know who the embezzler is. What? Who is it? My father's voice rose again, demanding the culprit's name. His authoritative tone intensified the ache in my ears, but I knew I couldn't delay any longer. It's Bob, I stated firmly. What did you say? When I uttered Bob's name, my father was completely speechless, caught off guard as if he hadn't anticipated this at all. It's not surprising he chose the younger son, Bob, who is more competent, to be the CEO of the company. I began, reflecting on the situation, but I never expected that Bob would be embezzling company funds. I had become aware of this while still working in the accounting department. Initially, the amounts were small, easily overlooked, but they grew bolder over time. Before I knew it, a substantial sum had been embezzled, and the only person who could have done it was Bob, now CEO. There's no future for the company at this rate, I thought grimly. It's on the brink of collapse. Bob must have realized that I knew about his embezzlement, which is why he forced me to quit abruptly. I continued, anticipating my father's disbelief. If you look at the accounting documents I left, it'll become clear. Do you want to see the evidence I've gathered? I'm prepared to sever ties, but I kept copies of everything for a reason. My father, who moments ago had said he couldn't believe it, fell silent at my words. But that's not all, I pressed on. The money he embezzled is being used for an affair with a married woman. A married woman? My father's voice shifted from surprise to utter exhaustion. This was news to me as well, I admitted. Sonia told me about it during one of our dinners together. The CEO, who cares deeply for his daughter, found out and is furious with Bob, especially since he's always around Sonia. At this rate, the company is headed towards bankruptcy, I concluded, knowing this was likely the first time my father was hearing the full extent of the situation. I heard a weak voice from my father, and I listened silently as he spoke. Can you help me out with some funds? Can you talk to the president of your company for me? If we can form a partnership with the Smith Group, we can turn our company around. He sounded as if he had just come up with a brilliant idea. In reality, I knew that partnering with the Smith Group was likely the only way to save our struggling company. Yet as my father asked for help over the phone for the first time, I felt an overwhelming sense of indifference. I'm sorry, but I can't, I replied calmly. I've already severed ties with all of you. What? My father's voice rose in disbelief, but I ended the call before he could finish his sentence. After that, my father and Bob called me repeatedly, but I blocked their numbers, finally freeing myself from the constraints of my family. It felt even more liberating than I had imagined. In the end, Bob went bankrupt not long after. He was left with debts, and my parents, who had always treated me as incompetent, were now being pursued for repayment. Do you ever worry about your family? Sonia asked curiously as we shared a pasta dinner after work. Since that incident, I felt closer to Sonia than ever. We spent almost every day together now, and I knew I needed to gather courage soon. No, I'm fine, I replied with relief. I'm relieved to hear that, Sonia said with a smile. I'm really glad you're nothing like your brother. What do you mean by that? I asked, pausing to drink some water. It means you're not like him, Sonia replied with a mischievous grin. Realizing that her words no longer hurt me, I was pleasantly surprised. It's a secret, she laughed happily. Watching Sonia like that, I felt an even stronger desire to spend more time with her to protect my current company and Sonia. With that thought, I made a firm resolve to continue working hard.
Hi, I'm Tom. I recently got married to someone really important to me, but our journey to this point wasn't easy. I want to tell you about how my wife and I met, starting from the beginning. We both got hired at the same company after college, and we're the same age. Her name's Margaret, but back then, we were just coworkers, and I'd call her Margaret casually. After our orientation, Margaret and I found ourselves working together in the sales department. We both pushed each other to excel, putting in hard work every day. At that time, I had a girlfriend, and things were going smoothly between us. Then one day in late April, my buddy Joe called me up. Joe and I had been friends since high school. Although we went to different colleges, we used to hang out occasionally, just us guys. Joe said, "Hey, I've got a couple of tickets for an amusement park. Want to double date with our girlfriends?" I'd never been on a double date before, so it felt a bit strange, but it sounded like it could be a fun experience. My girlfriend was also keen on the idea, so we agreed to go. During the long weekend, on the date of our double date, we met up at the amusement park. I stepped out of my car and called out to Joe, who waved back enthusiastically, saying, "Hey, long time no see." Despite knowing that we both had girlfriends, we hadn't met them or even knew their names before. Feeling a bit nervous, we introduced our partners, saying, "This is Margaret. Nice to meet you." When I saw the girl getting out of Joe's car, I exclaimed, "Wait, Margaret, is that you, Tom?" We both looked at each other and burst out laughing. It turned out that Joe's girlfriend was none other than my coworker, Margaret. "No way. I knew you were in sales. But Tom and Margaret, you work at the same company." Joe exclaimed in disbelief. It was such a surprising coincidence that all we could do was laugh, enjoying the moment like kids at an amusement park. Later, during lunch, they said they had something to share with me. Joe and Margaret had plans to tie the knot in June, although they hadn't set a specific date yet. They mentioned they wanted to wait until they had saved enough money for the wedding. Finally, on a fortunate day in June, Joe and Margaret exchanged vows. Margaret decided to keep her last name. I heard that since they got married, Margaret has been preparing Joe's lunch every day. I listened to all these romantic tales, but meanwhile, I experienced heartbreak when my girlfriend broke up with me that autumn. Ever since she learned about Joe and Margaret's wedding plans, she had been contemplating our relationship's future. I had been pondering it too, but her words hit me hard. "I can't see a future with you," she said. When I asked if I had done something wrong, her response was vague along the lines of, "It just doesn't feel right. Let's leave the past behind." I tried to accept it, but it was difficult to swallow. Joe and Margaret were there for me when I needed support and encouragement. Despite being newly married, they would invite me over for drinks to cheer me up. The three of us, along with other close friends and coworkers, started spending more time together. I thought this wonderful bond would last forever after Joe and Margaret's wedding. However, as the new year arrived and spring approached, marking our second year at the company, something unexpected happened. One Monday morning, Margaret was missing from work. I began to wonder if she was taking an unusual day off when my phone rang. It was a call from an old high school friend, sounding rushed and serious. Without preamble, he delivered the devastating news. Joe had an accident. I was stunned, unable to comprehend the words. "What? Joe, you must be joking. What do you mean he's gone?" The news hit me like a ton of bricks. The accident had occurred the previous night, leaving me in disbelief. Joe was sitting in the passenger seat of a friend's car when another vehicle, driven by a dozing driver, collided with theirs. Despite being rushed into emergency surgery, Joe tragically passed away in the early hours. I attended his funeral, unable to contain my tears as I mourned the loss of my dear friend. The harsh reality of his absence weighed heavily on me. Margaret initially held her composure but broke down in tears during the service. Unable to bear seeing her in such pain, I covered my face with a handkerchief, trying to mask my own grief. Afterwards, Margaret took a month off from work. When she returned, she had visibly lost weight, a physical manifestation of her grief. She approached my desk to express her gratitude for the emails I had sent during her absence, apologizing for causing any worry. Despite her smile, I could sense that she was still struggling. Margaret confided in me about the difficulty of coping with Joe's loss. especially during the lonely nights. She appreciated the messages I had sent, as they reminded her to try to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Even if it was just a sandwich, receiving an email from me motivated her to eat. Witnessing Margaret's pain, I couldn't bring myself to offer empty platitudes like, "I hope you feel better soon." Instead, I suggested going out for dinner after work to provide some comfort. Although she initially declined, citing her reluctance to socialize, we persisted in our invitations until she finally accepted. Margaret's appetite was modest, but seeing her enjoy the food and eat a little brought some relief to my heart. After dinner, as we walked home together along the dimly lit streets, Margaret began to speak about Joe. "He's in the cemetery now, and all I have left at home is his portrait. I feel so alone." Her tears flowed freely, and all I could offer was my handkerchief and a comforting touch on her back. Her grief over losing Joe was profound, leaving me at a loss for words. "I'm sorry," I murmured softly. "Thank you," Margaret replied amidst her tears, before resuming her walk. Initially planning to accompany her only part of the way, I couldn't bear to leave her alone in her sorrow, so I walked her all the way home. Once there, I lit a candle in Joe's memory. The room was adorned with pictures from the funeral, alongside joyful photos of Margaret and Joe. Seeing this display, I couldn't help but shed tears myself. "I'm sorry for crying when I should be supporting you," I choked out. Margaret wiped away her tears, acknowledging the frustration of their lost future. "But I have to keep moving forward, for Joe's sake," she shared, her determination shining through her sadness. I wondered how I could best support Margaret. "All I can do is listen to her and take her out for meals," I thought, feeling inadequate. Although Margaret found solace in her work, it was evident that she was putting on a brave front. Despite the challenges, she managed to navigate through the first anniversary of Joe's passing, gradually reclaiming her spirits. Throughout this time, our support for her remained steadfast. We continued to invite her out for dinners after work, and I continued to escort her home. On evenings when we returned early, I would light a candle in memory of Joe, honoring his presence in our lives. As I escorted Margaret home one evening, she suddenly asked, "Why do you always walk me home?" Concern laced her voice as she pointed out the dimly lit streets. "I don't want you to be in danger if something happens on the way home," she continued. "Besides, if anything were to happen to you, Joe would be furious." She chuckled lightly, trying to ease the seriousness of her words. "I don't mean to meddle, but I feel responsible for protecting you, someone Joe cared about deeply. Otherwise, he might haunt me in my dreams, scolding me for not looking after you." Margaret's gratitude flowed as she thanked me, sharing in the laughter that followed. Time marched on, and before we knew it, we found ourselves marking the third anniversary of Joe's passing. Both Margaret and I threw ourselves into our work with renewed vigor. Despite the long and tiring days, we continued our tradition of unwinding over dinner with coworkers. One day, as we walked together towards Margaret's home, she hesitantly mentioned a small favor she needed. "You see, the light bulbs in my foyer and dressing room have gone out." I attempted to reach the light bulbs by standing on a step stool, but they remained just out of my grasp. Margaret, somewhat embarrassed to ask for help, finally spoke up. "Could you lend me a hand?" "I can't quite reach," she requested. With a reassuring smile, I gladly agreed, dismissing her concerns with a light-hearted remark. "No problem at all. Don't worry about the small stuff," I reassured her, earning a grateful smile in return. Inside her home, I swiftly replaced the light bulbs. "Thanks a bunch. It's amazing how handy a tall person can be," Margaret remarked appreciatively. I jokingly replied, "Well, lucky for me, I can reach the ceiling. Otherwise, that would have been quite the predicament, huh?" Margaret chuckled, sharing a memory of Joe's struggles with a similar task in another room. I laughed along, remarking on my own height advantage. As I handed Margaret the folded step stool, our fingers brushed against each other unexpectedly, and our eyes met in a fleeting moment of connection. The laughter dissolved into a brief silence, but I quickly averted my gaze, feigning nonchalance. Suddenly, Margaret softly questioned, "Hey, why are you always so kind?" Her words caught me off guard, and our eyes met once again. In that instant, my heart skipped a beat, but I remained silent, simply regarding her. "You're always there for me, always caring," Margaret continued slowly, her words stirring something within me. Before I could respond, she added with a hint of playfulness, "You're almost too good to be true. I might start getting ideas." A rush of emotion surged through me, but Margaret quickly dismissed her remark, attributing it to perhaps being a little tipsy. She'd moved to put away the step stool as if nothing had happened. However, I found myself unable to let the moment pass. Before I could second-guess myself, I reached out and enveloped her in a tender hug from behind. A quiet moment passed between us. I could sense Margaret's warmth seeping through my embrace, and suddenly it hit me. The desire to protect Margaret surged within me, transcending the bounds of mere friendship or coworker camaraderie. I realized I was falling for her, yet just as quickly as the realization dawned on me, a vivid image of my dear friend Joe flashed through my mind, causing me to reluctantly loosen my grip on Margaret. "Sorry, I think I might have had a bit too much to drink," I mumbled apologetically, attempting to diffuse the tension. Margaret shook her head, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. As she turned towards me, a solitary tear trickled down her cheek. My gaze drifted to Joe's framed photograph, and without uttering a word, I approached it and lit a silent candle in my heart, silently begging for forgiveness. "See you at work tomorrow," I murmured to Margaret before quietly departing her home. The following day at the office, we went about our tasks as if nothing had transpired. Yet, with every exchanged glance, an unspoken weight hung heavy between us. I suspected Margaret felt it too. This silent dance continued for some time, till one evening, as I escorted Margaret home after dinner with coworkers, an unusual silence enveloped us. Sensing the unspoken words that had been lingering between us, it came to a halt, and Margaret followed suit. Summoning all my courage, I finally voiced my feelings. "Is it wrong if it's me? I'd want to stand by your side in any capacity," I confessed, my words brimming with sincerity. Margaret met my gaze, and after a pregnant pause, she nodded in acceptance. "Yes," she replied softly, acknowledging my sentiments. But this was not the end of our story. On my day off that week, I made a pilgrimage to a particular place, Joe's graveside. It was important for me to share this news with him right there where he rested. "Joe, I've come to make a promise," I began solemnly. "I vow to make Margaret happy and to care for her just as you would have. Please accept that I'll be by her side. I promise to safeguard her smile, no matter the challenges," I declared, bowing my head respectfully before his resting place. As I closed my eyes in silent reverence, time seemed to slip away. Suddenly, a gentle, warm breeze swept through the cemetery, caressing my skin. It felt like Joe's gentle reply to my pledge. Gratefully, I lifted my head and met his gravestone once more. "Do you forgive me?" I whispered, seeking his understanding. Another tender breeze brushed by, imbued with a kindness reminiscent of Joe's comforting presence. "Thank you," I murmured, bowing my head once more. I promised to honor this vow. I vowed to Joe before departing. A decade had passed since that solemn moment. Margaret and I had grown inseparable, living together in a partnership akin to a common-law marriage. On a poignant day after marking Joe's 13th anniversary, Margaret confided in me as we paused at a park after visiting his grave. With trembling hands, she revealed a marriage license, her eyes brimming with emotion, embraced Margaret tightly, assuring her that there was no need for apologies. Remember, we said any form of us is just right. I reminded her, attempting to lighten the mood. Margaret's tears flowed freely, but she nodded in agreement, managing a fragile smile. Don't cry, I teased gently. I made a promise, man to man. I chuckled, diverting her attention from her tears. With renewed resolve, we exchanged vows and became husband and wife. 2 years later, our family welcomed a new member, a beautiful baby girl who bore a striking resemblance to Margaret. On the day of her birth, a meteor shower graced the sky, a celestial spectacle that felt like Joe's blessing from above. Our daughter brought boundless joy into our lives, filling our home with her infectious laughter. As we cherish our family and continue to honor our commitments, we find solace in the belief that Joe watches over us, content to see Margaret's radiant smile. And so, we embrace life's journey, living each day in a way that honors our loved ones and ensures that our family always finds reason to smile.
I don't want a woman with a big belly like that. You'll have to take care of the baby all by yourself while I'm stuck with this big belly being pregnant for 9 months. He looked at me with disgust, and a mean smile appeared on his face. I knew this would happen someday, and even though I saw it coming, I went to my room right away. When I came back, I had papers in my hand. Okay, here are the divorce papers. I handed them to Anton. He looked shocked and shouted, "What's going on? Why are you doing this all of a sudden?" "Well, you suggested it first. Hurry up and sign it. I'll hand it in tomorrow," I dared him. His face went red quickly as my words hit him hard. "Just watch. You'll regret treating me badly and looking down on me," I declared. "My name's Helen. I'm 26 and a housewife. 2 years ago, I worked at a mobile company. That's where I met Anton Cade, my boss, when I was 24. We fell in love fast and got married. Anton, 3 years older, was really supportive, especially when I was new and clueless at work. I couldn't thank him enough for teaching me everything. As we worked together, we became friends and started going out for dinner often. When he asked me out, I was thrilled, especially because I'd never dated anyone before. It's a bit embarrassing, but I was always more into cartoon characters than real guys. But with everyone around me getting married, I started feeling the pressure. When I fell for Anton, I promised myself he'd be my first and only love. So when we started dating and got married a year later, I was so happy. Anton was handsome and popular with the ladies at work. I was proud to be his wife, and people congratulated us, saying they were happy for us. But little did I know what was coming. The day after we got married, I told my coworkers, "I'm married now, so I'm quitting my job." Just when we were excitedly beginning our married life, Anton dropped a bombshell, saying, "I've always wanted my wife to focus on the home. Don't worry, I can take care of us financially." "But this is so sudden. You never mentioned this before," I responded. Anton had never brought up me quitting my job before we got married. I got this job through my dad's connection, so leaving without notice wouldn't be right. I wanted to explain, but Anton's eyes silently warned me not to bring it up. So I stayed quiet. I couldn't hold it back any longer. "I know I should have told you, but it's decided. Starting tomorrow, you're not going to work," Anton declared. What a shock. Anton's announcement about me staying home starting tomorrow hit me so suddenly I felt dizzy. But Anton was firm in his decision. I couldn't argue with him, considering he used to be my boss. Even though I had to leave my job abruptly, I was determined to make our marriage succeed. Since Anton chose me and entrusted me with running the household, I wanted to live up to his expectations. I didn't want to seem like a bad wife. I put all my effort into the housework, cooking meals, especially Anton's favorites, and setting the table with as much food as possible. Even though Anton ate without saying whether he liked it or not, I secretly hoped for a word of appreciation. After quitting my job and losing my identity, I craved that acknowledgement. "Anton, I have an important meeting tomorrow. Is my jacket clean?" I asked. "Yes, it's ready," Anton replied. He sometimes showed a traditional, controlling side. Despite this, I reminded myself how lucky I was to have married him and tried to meet his expectations. With no income of my own, living with Anton was my only option for a normal life. Although our relationship often felt more like employer and maid than husband and wife, things were mostly smooth. But one day, I fell ill and couldn't get out of bed. Feeling weak, I thought, I'll catch up on chores tomorrow. Anton stormed into the bedroom and snapped, "What are you doing? Get up and make some food." He kicked the blanket off me. "I'm sorry, I'm not feeling well today. Can you manage something for yourself?" I pleaded, hoping for sympathy. Instead of understanding, Anton scowled and said, "You don't even work, and you're lying down because you're a little sick. Pathetic. Get up." He kicked me again, and I got up stunned. I couldn't believe he would demand chores from his sick wife. I'd never seen this side of him before we got married. Maybe I missed it, but it was too much. I did my chores, tears streaming down my face. After days of feeling unwell, I realized I'd missed my period. Rushing to the drugstore, I bought a pregnancy test. When it turned out positive, tears of joy streamed down my face. I couldn't wait to tell Anton when he got home from work. But when he finally returned well past midnight, reeking of alcohol and stumbling, my excitement waned. It was surprising how much he'd drunk, especially without warning me when I had dinner prepared. Despite my eagerness to share the news, I hesitated seeing him in such a state. "I haven't been to the doctor yet, so it's not confirmed," I started, hoping to share our happiness. But Anton's reaction was unexpected. His face darkened as he muttered, "A child? What have you done?" It was a side of Anton I'd never seen before, his tone unlike anything I'd heard from him. "What? I don't want a kid. This is the worst. If you're having it, raise it yourself." His harsh words hit me like a slap, and he stormed off to the bathroom, tossing his clothes aside. It was unreal. I couldn't understand why he'd say such hurtful things about our baby instead of being happy. The joy I felt moments ago vanished, replaced by deep sadness. How could he say that? He'd never mentioned not wanting kids before. We hadn't even talked about birth control, so I naturally assumed we both wanted children. Hearing him call having a child the worst was beyond belief. As I hung up Anton's jacket and went to take his shirt to the laundry, something caught my eye. "What's this?" A piece of paper peeked out of the dress shirt pocket, clearly a receipt by its texture. At first, I thought it was just from tonight's outing, ready to toss it away. But then I saw the name of the establishment. "Is this from a motel?" My hand shook as I held the receipt, confirming my suspicion. It was indeed from a motel. The weight of this discovery pressed heavily on my heart. Why doesn't Anton love me? Isn't marriage supposed to be built on love, especially since we've only been married for a little over a year? How could this be happening? I'd spent years lost in fantasies, never fully experiencing a real relationship. I couldn't immediately accept this harsh reality. But the idea of Anton cheating started to make sense, and pieces of the puzzle fell into place. Had Anton been using me since the beginning of our marriage? Was he truly in love with someone else while I was just a convenient servant? All these doubts churned inside me. Was that why he reacted so harshly to my pregnancy news? As I wrestled with these thoughts, nausea overwhelmed me, and I grew convinced that something wasn't right. Yes, it's clear now. Maybe he pushed me out of the company because his mistress was there. It felt like pieces were falling into place, as if he'd married me for stability rather than love. Reality blurred with my imagination, but his heartless words after learning about my pregnancy couldn't be ignored. That day, I resolved to gather evidence of Anton's affair. From then on, his cold treatment of me was undeniable. It was as if he couldn't forgive me for getting pregnant, even though he knew I was suffering from morning sickness. He'd deliberately eat strong-smelling foods near me and criticize my housework, making me do it over again. My pregnant body endured a lot, and my heart weighed heavy. But despite it all, I continued to investigate his affair. Anton was glued to his cell phone, even taking it to the bathroom, making it impossible for me to sneak a peek. When I managed to sneak into his room, it was spotless, with nothing suspicious in sight. He was always meticulous at work, and his desk was impeccably organized. I realized it would be hard to catch him off guard directly. I kept checking his pockets for any clues, like receipts, but my investigation was proving tough. The idea of hiring a detective crossed my mind, but I didn't have the money for it. Lost in thought about my situation, I got a surprise call. It was my father, who rarely contacted me, so I was curious about why he was calling. "Hey, it's your dad. How's everything?" he asked. His call caught me off guard, knowing how busy he usually is. "Dad, what's up? Aren't you swamped with work?" I questioned. My team's been handling things well, so I've got some free time, he explained. My dad's the CEO of a company in Canada, and work has always been his priority. I didn't have many memories of playing with him as a kid, but I respected his dedication, so his call left me curious. I asked, "What's going on?" As he began to speak, he dropped a bombshell. "Seriously?" I exclaimed, struggling to believe it. "Yeah, he wouldn't make this up. I need you to trust me on this," my dad reassured me. At first, I was speechless, but as it sunk in, I felt relieved. "Thanks, Dad. I really appreciate it," I said gratefully before ending the call. After all my dating, I was starting to see results, and it felt like a small victory. But with each new piece of information came a surge of anger and frustration over the ongoing tension with Anton. Months dragged on, and our relationship stayed strained. Then, something happened that turned our world upside down. At 9 months pregnant, I treaded carefully around Anton, always on edge. I tried to keep to myself, living a quiet, restricted life. One evening, I served dinner as usual, and when Anton got home, we sat down to eat. As I quietly took my first bite, Anton suddenly slammed his fork down. "What's this? It's awful," he yelled, hurling the food I'd made onto the floor. His sudden rage left me bewildered, struggling to make sense of it all. Anger surged within me as I watched him dismiss the meal I prepared. "I've been thinking about this for a while. Lately your cooking has been bland," Anton criticized, claiming my meals lacked flavor. It was true that during my pregnancy I'd been toning down the spices for health reasons, but it was only temporary. If he wanted more flavor, he could have added seasoning himself. Why did he have to react like this? Before I could respond, Anton delivered another blow with his hurtful words. "I don't want a wife with a big belly like yours. You'll be on your own with the baby while I deal with my own issues," he spat, his eyes full of malice and a cruel smile on his lips. I had feared this confrontation, but I'd hoped for a different outcome. Without a word, I stormed off to my room, retrieved a document, and returned to confront Anton. "Here are the divorce papers," I declared, thrusting the documents in front of him. Anton's face twisted in shock. "What on earth? Why now?" he stuttered. "Your idea. Sign them quickly. I'll file them tomorrow," I retorted. Truthfully, I'd been considering divorce since I suspected Anton's infidelity. But with a baby on the way, I hesitated, unsure if I could manage alone. Now, though, I had a plan. My resolve seemed to provoke Anton's, his face boiling with anger. "You'll regret this. Every moment you belittled and controlled me," I warned, unwavering. "I'll manage. Don't worry," I reassured him. Perhaps annoyed by my determination, he snatched the papers and began filling them out. "Here. If this is what you want, take it," he grumbled. "Thank you," I replied, surprised at how smoothly Anton handed over the divorce papers. The next day, I wasted no time in submitting them and leaving the house. I knew he'd be in for a shock when he got home from work. Moving in with my parents seemed like the right move, especially with my dad returning to the US from Canada. I was grateful for their support and fed up with life with Anton. On a day I left, Anton called 3 times, but I ignored everyone. Eventually, the calls stopped. It was clear I meant little to him. He was probably content with his mistress, maybe even considering remarriage. I'd moved on from Anton, and 6 months had flown by. My baby arrived safely, and I was happily settled with my parents. Life was peaceful until Anton called again. At first, I ignored his calls, but his persistence forced me to answer. "What do you want now?" I asked, wary of his tone. "Why were you on that show? And since when were you the daughter of a CEO with millions?" Anton's voice boomed with surprise and anger. It turned out he'd seen a TV show broadcasted after I returned home. I'd been approached by a TV station because of my father's position as the CEO of a top global tech company. They featured our family's lavish lifestyle, filming at our house and discussing our wealth, estimating it at around $10 million. I hadn't expected Anton to see the show, but the power of TV is remarkable. "By the way, I didn't mention I have a $33 million inheritance, which is why I could divorce you," I calmly replied. "My father told me about it, giving me the confidence to live comfortably after our divorce." Anton's immediate reaction was pure fury. "What? That's underhanded. Why keep this from me? Half of it belongs to me, doesn't it? Give me the money," he demanded. Just as I thought, Seeing the show only made you think of squeezing money out of me. Gifts from parents don't count in property distribution. And let's not forget your own wrongdoing, I retorted. I'm tired of your anger, Anton. You made the call. You should know better. You can't blame me for your actions. You cheated, didn't you? And with someone from your company, a junior, right? You started before we even got married. I revealed, shocking Anton with the information I got from my father. Finally, I had the upper hand. Did you think I wouldn't find out? My father has connections in your company. One of them spilled the beans about your affair. I never brought it up, but I will be asking for child support, I declared. Anton, still in denial, protested. Stop joking. Why should I pay? It's your fault for getting pregnant and slacking off with the housework. Hearing Anton blame you without owning up to his own mistakes was unbelievable. How could I have ever been married to someone so lacking in common sense? I knew leaving him was the right decision. I thought as Anton's pitiful plea reached my ears. I'm broke. My wife spent all my money, and now I'm drowning in debt, he lamented, leaving me more dumbfounded than angry. I never want to deal with such an unreasonable person again, I declared, gripping my phone firmly. Your words are ridiculous. I want nothing to do with you. My lawyer will handle child support. Don't call me and you won't see our child anymore. Goodbye. Wait, Anton pleaded, but I didn't entertain him. After pouring out my emotions, I hung up and blocked his number, taking a deep breath. It's over now, right? No more calls from Anton. I don't want him disrupting our peaceful life, I reassured myself. Just then, I heard my baby crying from the other room, and I hurried to comfort them. It turned out Anton started paying child support each month, as a former colleague revealed. He claimed his new wife was a big spender, and he struggled to cover his living costs with mounting debt. Apparently, he reached out to me hoping for a share of my inheritance, but with me not budging, he found himself drowning in expenses, his income falling short. Whether it was pride or financial pressure, Anton's life took a downward spiral. To add to his troubles, he foolishly began his job hunt after leaving his current company, leading to financial hardship. Learning this from a colleague left me unmoved. He brought this upon himself. His cruel words and actions won't be forgotten easily. I hope he learns from his mistakes. Meanwhile, I'm enjoying parenting with my parents, free from financial worries. With the possibility of inheriting the company, I'm ready to step up. Like my hardworking father, I'm determined to make my mark.